Good morning, everyone. I welcome you to this session on maps and GIS, where we shall be discussing about what are maps, what are the major elements of a map, and how a map is drawn, how is it converted from a 3D surface to a 2D surface, as well as what are the basic concepts and introduction to GIS, which we nearly have to be thorough with before we get into the usage of the major GIS softwares that we look forward for the practical sessions. So, bringing us to the first topic of today, which is maps. We all know map is nothing but a representation which is usually on a flat surface as of the features of an area of the earth or a portion of the heavens. So, just to be in more simpler words, it is nothing but a representation of the earth's surface on a 2D paper, which is generally a flat surface. Now, a very important point when it comes to defining a map, we need to write down that all the natural and man-made features that are there on the earth's surface are represented on a flat surface which is drawn to scale. Now, this drawn to scale is a very important phrase when it comes to maps, because all the maps are drawn to some or the other kind of ratio, which is the ratio between the map distance and the ground distance. So it is always termed to be the scale. Now, whenever you look into a map, you will always find that there's something written as 1 centimeter is equal to 2 kilometers, or it is written as 1 is to 25 250,000. So all these are nothing but scales. So it shows that maps are always drawn to scale. Now, maps generally, when you look at the usage of maps or the importance of maps in that case, it is basically the basic idea of drawing maps is understanding the interrelationships between the natural and the man made features, understanding various phenomena like maybe the soil, the climate, the vegetation, the population density, the population distribution, the rivers, the mountains, the volcanoes, the earthquakes, etc. So, all these are represented on a map, which helps us to easily understand the area without visiting that area. So if I want to know something about US, I will just take a map of the US and I will understand the basic natural features, the basic man-made features that are there in US. Don't literally need to go to US and have a field study on it. So the basic idea of having maps is obtaining maximum information in the minimum space that we have. Now, definitely, we are restricted when it comes to drawing maps on a paper. So, that's minimum space, but we want to put in maximum information, because someone who's referring to our map will get information that he or she wants. Hence, bringing us to a very important definition, which we call it as cartography. Cartography is defined as the art, science, and technology of map making. Now, in traditional times, it was always defined as the art and science of map making is cartography. But with the recent developments that is happening with the IT sector, yes, now it has been included as the art, science, and technology of map making. Now, when you look at a map, there are certain elements in a map that are very, very important, and that has to be there when a map is seen. For example, the first and most important element is the title and the subtitle. The title generally determines the area. So this map which is shown in the screen is a world map. So yes, my title is world map. But when it comes to the subtitle will be, in terms of the theme of the map. So here it is generally the countries that are shown, so we call it as a political world map. So my subtitle becomes political. The second important thing that has to be given in a map is scale. And like the definition that I just told you, that it is drawn to scale, so that scale has to be mentioned in the map somewhere or the other. It is generally mentioned at the bottom of the map, as you can see it here. It is either there in the left hand side, or it can be there in the right hand side bottom. So here you can see that a graphical scale has been given, so it is easy for us to, when I want to find distances between two places. So this scale will definitely help me in finding out the distance between two places on the map. The next important thing that has to be given is the direction. The direction is nothing but giving us which is north, which is south, which is east, which is west. So now if I want to go from one place to the other place, I will know if I have to go towards the north, or I have to go towards the south, or if I have to go towards the east or west respectively. So I need to know that. So when I am referring to a map, I will definitely look for the north arrow, where the north arrow, as given here, is depicted by this kind of an arrow. The head of the arrow is generally towards the north. Once the north is known, it is easier for us to determine which is south, east, and west. The next thing that is there in a map which has to be there is the grid system. Now grid system is nothing but the combination, or the combination of latitudes and longitudes that we call. you know when I say that I need to locate India. So how will I locate India? There has to be some kind of reference given. So when I have to give a reference, it is generally there in terms of the latitudes and longitudes, which has to be there in a map when we are constructing one. The next thing that comes in is conventional signs and symbols. Now conventional signs and symbols is used when you have to depict information in the map, but you don't have enough space. Now map, if you look at the earth's surface is so huge. Now all that has to be put into a, say, a A4 size paper. So it's difficult for me to write down everything in that paper. So what happens is, there are certain symbols that are drawn on the map. These symbols are their structure, their color is predetermined, and then that is being used in all the maps. For example, in a topographical map, when I have to depict a benchmark, I always write it as BM and the height. So it becomes easier for me. It takes a smaller space than writing benchmark completely. So it is just BM and then the height number, maybe 200, maybe 240, whatever it is. So that's how conventional signs and symbols are being used. For example, in the map that is shown here, now if I have to show a major place with a temple, now with so much of data given here, how will I actually draw a temple? So there's a small symbol of a temple that we have, which we call it as the conventional symbol of the temple. That hardly will be of, say, a millimeter uh, length and breadth, that way, and then that can be drawn on the map, which will show that okay, that area has a temple there. So these conventional signs and symbols are very, very important, because not all information can be given on the map. So when you have to reduce the kind of information, or you have to reduce the kind of the space utilized, you will use such conventional signs and symbols. The next thing that comes in is another very important element, which is the legend. Now, legend is very, very important. Now, look at this map over here. You can see the number 15 over here. What is this 15? I need to know what 15 is. No, the person who's constructed the map knows what is 15, but I don't know it because I'm referring to the map. So this 15, which is here, has to be depicted in this legend, somewhere in that paper, either outside the map area or inside the map area where there is an empty space. This legend will be drawn where that number 15, what it depicts, is written. Moreover, there are certain conventional signs and symbols that are they are not predetermined. So what happens is, the person who's referring to the map doesn't know. So that symbol will be drawn below in a legend, and what it represents is also written. So it becomes easier for the reader to understand what the conventional signs and symbols are. So these are the important elements of the map that has to be there in a map whenever it is constructed. Now this is very important when it comes to your GIS softwares, as when you create a layout for your study area, or maybe in terms of any thematic map that you are constructing on GIS softwares, when you create that layout, you need to be sure that all these have been put in. So be it the title, subtitle, be it the scale, be it the legend, or be it the direction, all that has to be there in your map layout. So this becomes very important for you, bringing us to the types of maps that we have. Now, generally, if you look at maps, maps are there are types of maps on the basis of size, which brings us to the first type on the basis of size, which is large scale maps. Now, large scale maps, they are generally the topographical maps or the cadastral maps. We all know what are topographical maps. These are carefully surveyed maps which are drawn to scale majorly at 1 is to 50,000 and 1 is to 25,000 scale. So, very detailed maps which are generally used by the military people. The next type of large scale maps comes as cadastral maps. Cadastral maps are nothing but these are maps that represents the boundaries of properties and individual buildings. So these are village maps, I should say, in simple terms. Village maps, nothing but the boundaries of the villages are shown. It is more detailed, in that each and every building boundary is also shown. So it's that kind of detailing which is there in these maps. So definitely these are large scale maps. When it comes to small scale maps are generally in terms of wall maps and atlas maps. Now, we've already seen, the wall maps that are there in our departments. Let's take it as the departments, the the geography departments that we have in the universities. They have so huge maps. These are nothing but wall maps, which are there, which are put on the walls. Then you have the atlas maps. We all have the atlas books where uh, all the different the thematic maps have been given, basis on either it is political, or it is physical, or it is population, or is it natural features, physical divisions. All those kind of maps that you see it on the atlas books is nothing but atlas maps. The other type of maps that comes on, which is there on the basis of purpose and content. One earlier that we were discussing was on the basis of size. Now we have on the basis of purpose and content. These types of maps are nothing but physical maps, political maps, and thematic maps. We all know physical maps are nothing but giving us a physical divisions. So in that case, of if I look at India physical map will give me, where are the Himalayas located, where are the Ghats located, where's the Deccan Plateau located, where's the Great Indian Plains located. So all that physical divisions are given in physical maps. Political divisions, the states of India, when I only show the boundaries of the states in India, that is nothing but political maps. And thematic maps is based on certain theme. Now, if I want to show a population density map, then it becomes a thematic map because it is based on only one theme, which is population density. So that kind of maps we call it as thematic maps. Now, since the starting, I have been telling you that scale is a very, very important factor when it comes to maps. In the definition itself, it was written that maps are drawn to scale. So, what is this scale? In simple words, scale is a ratio between 2 points on the map to the same 2 points on the ground. Now we all know that the 3D Earth surface is being converted to a 2D Earth surface, and you have to represent that huge area in a small A4 size, or say A3 size paper, whatever it is. So when I'm representing um, the the features, somewhere or the other, I am supposed to draw it to scale. When someone is referring to your map which is constructed and sitting over here, they want to know that what is the distance between 2 points on the ground. So that ratio has to be given on the map, and that is given through scale. So the simple formula of scale that has been given, or what it is always is as, is map distance between 2 points, two which is or divided by the ground distance between the same 2 points. So say A and B on a map is about 1 centimeter. So then my ground distance, which I will be preparing the map on the specific survey that I'll be doing, then I'll be writing, okay, 1 centimeter is 2 kilometers. So A and B, if it is 1 centimeter, then on the ground it is 2 kilometers. If I say that A and B distance is about, say, 3 centimeters, then according to my scale, which is 1 centimeter equal to 2 kilometers, 3 centimeters will be equal to 6 kilometers. So that's how the calculation of scales go by when it comes to maps. Now, the types of scales that we have are three: the statement scale, the linear scale, and the graphical scale. The statement scale, the linear scale, and the representative fraction. Now, the statement scale is the simplest form of scale. It is stated in words very clearly: 1 centimeter to 1 kilometer, or 1 inch to 5 miles. Very clear. So 1 centimeter on the map is 1 kilometer on the ground. So it becomes very, very easy for the person who's referring the map to understand the scale. The left hand value, as I said, is the map distance, and the right hand value will always be the ground distance. The advantage is it is very, very, very easy. So the relationship between the map and the ground distance can be derived without much calculations. But it also has certain disadvantages. The disadvantages that it has is, if I'm only familiar to this, one system which is centimeter to kilometer, then I won't be familiar to inches and miles. So understanding that part of the system, or the scale which is the scale if written in that system, it becomes difficult for me. So that disadvantage is there for the statement scale. Moreover, when I am enlarging or reducing a map to the original, then the scale does not remain the same. So if I'm enlarging it, the scale changes. If I'm reducing it, the scale changes. And this will definitely not then help me. So it has two disadvantages also, apart being very easy. It is also known as the verbal scale. The next type of scale that we have is a graphical scale. Now, the graphical scale is always drawn on the map. It is either drawn in a single line, or it is drawn in some kind of grid this way. And the simplest way of knowing the scale, or you have to convert this scale into a statement scale, to be in simpler words. Why? Because looking at the scale, it is difficult to determine what the scale is. What is 1 centimeter, what is 1 kilometer, it's very difficult. So what you have to do is, you have to take your normal scale, the ruler that you have. That ruler, you will have to keep it on this drawn scale, and then you will determine that, okay, 1 centimeter here says 2 kilometers. So yes, my graphical scale is saying that 1 centimeter on the map is 2 kilometers on the ground. This graphical scale, you have two kind of divisions. You have one primary division, and one you have the secondary division. The primary divisions are the major divisions that are drawn on the scale, which is they are drawn from left to right. So you can see it over here. So it's 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So these are the primary divisions. The secondary divisions that we have, these are smaller units, and when you see their numbering, it is always from the right to the left. So see, this is 0 kilometer, this is 1 kilometer, this is 2 kilometer. But say somewhere, after measuring with the help of a thread, in that case, my starting point is 0, my ending point is somewhere between 1 and 2. So what do I do is, that distance, after 1 and in between 2, what will I do is, I will put it over here in this part for my secondary division. Now what will I do? I will start counting from the right. So this line, then this line, this line, then this line. Say it comes exactly in the midpoint. So what becomes is, it is 1, 0.1 kilometer and 500 meters. So I call it as 1.5 kilometers. So it becomes easy this way. So please remember this: when it comes to primary divisions, it is always written, the numbers are always written from left to right. When it comes to secondary divisions, then the units of those secondary divisions is always written from right to left. Graphical scale, we also call it as the linear scale. The only advantage of this graphical scale is whether I enlarge a map or reduce a map from its original size, the graphical scale also enlarges and reduces. So it becomes easy for me if I want to, enlarge or reduce a map. But it also has a major disadvantage, and it the major disadvantage of it is restricted for those who only can understand it. you know uh, Generally, I have seen that people get confused with the primary and the secondary division, so it becomes very difficult if only graphical scale is given on the map, because then calculating distances at one point of time becomes a bit difficult. So that limitation is there for this scale, bringing us to the next type and the last type of the map scale that we have, which is representative fraction. Now, representative fraction is defined as uh, the ratio of map distance to ground distance without any units. Um, that's the major advantage. The definition itself gives you the major advantage that it is not based on any kind of unit. So if I want to change it, if I want it in the centimeter kilometer system, I can do that way. If I want it as the inches mile system, then I can do that also. So representative fraction is always independent of units, which makes it to be the most versatile scale. Are we clear with that? Hopefully, I am sure you're clear with the explanation that I am giving you for this. This is a very important form of scale because it does not have any units. So, be it your statement scale or graphical scale, which is always dependent on certain units, this is independent. The numerator, which is there in the representative fraction, which is on the left hand side, is always 1. So it is something like 1 is to 50,000, 1 is to 25,000, 1 is to 250,000. So what happens is, whenever I want to convert it, into some kind of system, be it centimeter kilometer system or inches mile system, I will always take it as 1 centimeter is to 5,000 or maybe say 50,000 centimeters. So 1 centimeter on the map is 50,000 centimeters on the ground. So then I can change that 50,000 centimeters into, say, kilometers if I want. Or if I want, I can change it to, say, millimeters, whatever it is. Whatever system I want, I will change it to. Or I can say it as 1 inch on the map is equal to 50,000 inches on the ground. So you then change that inches to miles if you're more frequent user of the inches and miles system. So yes, that's how representative fraction is given on a map. I'll show you the picture over here, which is given. See, this is the graphical scale and this is the RF, which is the representative fraction. So say if this is 2 centimeters, 2 centimeters is equal to 1 kilometer, and the representative fraction of that is 1 is to 50,000, which is 1 centimeter is 2 kilometers. The scale will be the same, be it in terms of graph, if the scale is in terms of graphical scale or statement scale or RF, it will always be the same for the same map. For different maps, it will be different. The advantage of this representative fraction is it is only a fraction and thus independent of any particular unit of measurement, like I told you before. It can be converted into any unit of measurement and has a universal application. And hence, it is known as the international scale or a natural scale. The next important element that we were talking about was the map conventional signs and symbols. Now, we all know that it is difficult to represent all the features that are there on the Earth's surface on the map with detailed information. Correct. So if I'm drawing a map with a scale, say 1 centimeter is 1 kilometer, that 1 kilometer area on the Earth's surface has so many things. It has a temple, it has a tree, it may have a part of a forest, or it may have roads. So how do I actually depict all this? So when it comes to depicting or showing all these, I use certain conventional signs and symbols. So these signs and symbols, say if I have to depict a road, I will show it with a red colored line. So depending upon what kind of road it is, if it's a metalled road, I will show a thick red colored line. If it's a footpath, I will show a dotted red colored line. So that kind of signs and symbols are being used in a map when it comes to depicting, may either be it man-made features or natural features. When it comes to river, I'll be showing a river, and I'll be coloring with, or I'll be showing it with a blue color, which shows that it is a perennial river. If I'm using a black color, then it is a non-perennial river. Correct. When it comes to railways, I'm going to show it with a black line, and with certain divisions on it, so which depicts it's a railway line. So all these kind of features have to be depicted on the map. You cannot, if you are just drawing a political map, it is okay, I'm showing the states. But when I am having a detailed map, like a topographical map or a cadastral map, in that case I need to represent each and every feature that is there on the Earth's surface. And to represent that, yes, I have to draw a road, so I'll draw it in terms of a line. I will draw, I'll show settlements in terms of certain square boxes. So those conventional signs and symbols are really very, very important. So depicting man-made or natural features, all these are depicted in three types of symbols: point symbols, line symbols, and area symbols. Now, point symbols, when it comes to buildings, or maybe tanks, or maybe trigonometrical beacons, all these are shown by point symbols. Wells, they are shown by point symbols. When it comes to line symbols, it is majorly in terms of the railways, the telephone lines, the communication lines, the power lines, the roads. All these are rivers. They are all shown by lines. When it comes to area features, it is more of the forest area, or a barren land, or in that case the cultivated area, or the orchard areas. All these are areas. What we call it as areas are shown by area symbols, or we call it, to be in simple words, we call it as polygon symbols. Now, depending upon the scale of the map and the kind of area that you are showing on the map, your point and polygon symbols will differ. For example, in a cadastral map, when it comes to all those detailed cadastral map where I'm showing the buildings in detail, the area covered by the building, then those buildings will be shown with polygon features. But if there's a topographical map, the settlements will be shown by point symbols, which is a small square. A simpler example, if I have a whole India map, or in that case a whole Sri Lanka map, and if I want to mark a city in that, I will mark it with a point. But when it comes to just the northern part of India, or maybe a northern, just a small part of India, where I have to show the area covered by a city, then that city will be depicted by a polygon feature. So depending upon the kind of map you have, your scale, your point and area symbols will change. All these map symbols can be grouped into 5 major elements, which I call it as relief, water, vegetation, man-made and political elements. Your relief features will include the contours, the spot heights, the trigonometrical beacons. Your water elements will include lakes, rivers, you have reservoirs, then you have tanks in that case. Then when it comes to vegetation elements, it is majorly in terms of the cultivation in that is taking place in that area, the orchards, the vineyards, the forests, the plantations, the woodland areas. So all that comes under vegetation. The man-made features will be majorly the communication lines and the settlements, and the political elements will be in terms of boundaries. So, be it village boundaries, be it city boundaries, be it international boundaries, all these boundaries will be depicted in the map. When you are drawing certain symbols, or I should say the conventional signs and symbols, there are certain color schemes for each and every symbol. Apart from the color scheme of the conventional signs and symbol, you also have the color scheme for each and every boundary also. So let's get into what is the general color scheme that is there in the map and how can you interpret it. So when you look at the map and it shows you brown color, so it is nothing but the land or the earth features. So it may be in terms of the eroded areas, maybe in terms of the sand dune areas, or the prominent rock outcrop areas, or you can see the gravel roads that are there. All that will be depicted with brown color. The contour lines are depicted with brown color because it shows height. So when it comes to depicting the earth features, the physical divisions, in that case it is majorly in terms of the brown color. Then brings us to the light blue color, which is depicting water features. So be it dams or canals or lakes, marshes, perennial rivers, water towers, all these are shown with light blue color. Dark blue color, national freeways are depicted by dark blue color. Green color, we all know green represents the vegetative area, so it is the cultivated fields, the golf courses, the nature and game reserve boundaries, the orchards, vineyards, all these are shown with green color. Black color is generally the construction features. Railways is shown by black color. At times, buildings are shown by black color. Bridges is shown by black color. Then you have dam walls. There are certain boundaries that are shown in black. You have telephone lines, power lines, all these communication lines, wind pumps. You have wrecks, cemeteries. All these are shown in black color. You have gray color, which again shows construction features. Now gray color is areas that are being recently being developed or recently being constructed. So kind of built up areas, the building which is being constructed now will be shown by gray color. There are certain cadastral information that will be shown by gray color. Red, you have the major roads that will be which will be depicted by red color. You have lighthouses, you have marine lights, which will be depicted by red color, and finally you have pink color, which shows international boundaries. So all this which is drawn on the map will give us a perfect map of an area. But what is the use, what is the function of these maps, or what are the uses of the maps? When I'm drawing a map, what is the use, what is the function of it? Map is nothing but a symbolic representation of the selected features of a place, which is usually drawn on a flat surface. So it represents information of the world in a simple visual way. So if I don't want to visit a country and I want to know the basic information of it, yeah, I can Google it, but that Google will also show me certain maps which will help me better understand. They teach us about the world by showing sizes and shapes of the countries, location of features, and distances between the places. Maps also show distribution of things over the earth, such as settlement patterns. They can show the exact location of houses and streets in a city neighborhood. Cartographers, which are in simple words map makers, the ones who are constructing a map, create maps for different purposes. you know Maybe tourism based maps, maybe educational based maps, maybe military use maps, maybe government use maps. So all these, there are different purposes of the maps. All those purposes will be fulfilled when that map is correctly constructed. Meteorologists, they all study weather, so they construct weather maps to forecast the weather. City planners, they need maps to plan where to put hospitals, and if there's a hospital here, then I need to have a medical store nearby. The place should be in such a way that people can go to that place. It's not far away from the city, or it's not exactly at the center of the city where it becomes very difficult for people to commute. So all that decision, when it comes to for city planners, that can also be done with the usage of maps. Now, okay, I am constructing a map, but when I am constructing a map, I will have to take care that the earth features are represented properly on the map. When I'm converting a 3D space into a 2D space, there'll be a lot of distortions. So I have to decide what kind of distortions should be there and should not be there. So depending on that, there are certain map projections. Earth is spherical in shape. I have to have a map which is uh, a plain paper. It's not going to be the circular shape. It will be a plain rectangular shape or a square shape. So what can be done to convert the map, or what is the method of converting that 3D space into 2D space? I need something known as the map projection. So to define map projection, it is nothing but transferring information from a spherical or a ball shaped surface of the earth into a flat piece of paper. It is the methodology. So a globe, a spherical model of the earth, accurately represents the shape and location of the continents, because globe is spherical, earth is spherical. So it is easy for me to represent the countries, the continents in that case. But when I am changing that sphere into a flat piece of paper, it becomes difficult. So for changing that, from spherical to that flat surface, I need map projection. So it's a major challenge for cartographers, because as I told you, when it comes to changing that spherical into a flat surface, there are certain distortions. Those distortions can be in terms of the size or the shape or the scale in that case, and that becomes a major challenge for cartographers. So depending upon the purpose of the map, the cartographers have to decide what elements of accuracy are most important to preserve. These elements of accuracy that is there will determine the projection that has to be used. There are three important types of, or I should say, the three basic types of projections that we have. And these are planar projections, conical projections, and cylindrical projections. Now, as I told you, that there are different types of projections, and all these types of projections have different goals of sacrificing data and preserving accuracy of certain type of data. So um, one projection will I would say sacrifice the area, but it will give me proper distance. Some will be not shape preserving, but not distance preserving. That kind of distortions will be there with one and the other. So there are area preserving projections, which will preserve the area and will have the equivalent projection. Then you have the shape preserving area, which we call it as the conformal or the orthomorphic projections, Then you have the direction preserving area, which we generally call it as azimuthal projections. And then we have the distance preserving, which will be, the equidistant, will show the true distance between 2 points on the map. Okay, now it is very important for us to understand here that it is impossible to construct a map projection which will have both equal area and conformal. you know if I have equal area, some or the other kind of distortion will be there, maybe in terms of distance, maybe in terms of size, maybe in terms of area, maybe in terms of shape. That kind of distortion will be there for one or the other. All cannot be preserved in one projection. So depending upon what is the aim or what is the purpose of map construction, my projection will differ. The first kind of projection that comes in is the planar projection. Now imagine you have a globe which is spherical in shape, and you take a plain piece of, say, a paper or a cardboard, and you just keep it on the globe, just as it is shown here. So whatever area that is there on this, that exactly is touching the cardboard is exactly touching the sphere, that area will be properly represented. So planar projections are most accurate at the centers where the plane touches the globe. They are often used for maps if you want to construct maps for the areas that are located on the poles. Conical projection is a same kind of the cone. Just take a cone, construct a cone of a paper cone, and put that paper cone on the globe. So all the area that actually touches the paper will be properly represented. So as written here, when the cone is unwrapped and made into a flat surface, latitude lines appear curved in circles or semicircles. Lines of longitude are straight and come together at one pole. So this conical projection that actually shows us that the longitudes are coming closer towards the poles, and the latitude lines are in terms of circles and semicircles. Conical projections are best when it comes to depicting areas of the mid-latitude regions, which are neither close to the equator nor close to the poles. For this reason, conical projections are often used for maps of the United States, most of which lies in the mid-latitudes. The third kind of projection that comes in is the cylindrical projection. The cylindrical projection, you just imagine now that paper, you fold that paper in terms of a cylinder, and you just put that on the globe. It just passes through, the globe comes in the center, so all that mid part which is touching the paper will be properly represented. So the equatorial areas majorly are represented properly when it comes to cylindrical projection. So when the cylinder which I have, the paper cylinder which I have put through the sphere, when I cut it open and flatten it for a map, the regions that are near the equator will be most accurate, and the regions that are near the pole will be the most distorted. Now, these were the major three basic types of projections that are there, be it planar, be it the cylindrical or the conical ones. Depending upon which area I want to represent, I will use these. Apart from that, there are two others that have come into the picture recently, which we call it as the UTM and the UPS projections. UTM is nothing but the Universal Transverse Mercator, which is a plane coordinate grid system, which is named for the map projection based on the transverse Mercator. It has 60 zones. The earth is converted into 60 zones. Each of the zone is 6 degrees of longitude in width. The zones are numbered from 1 to 60, beginning at 180 degrees longitude and increasing towards the east. The military uses this UTM, and they have their own implementation of this UTM system, which they call it as the Military Grid Reference System, which is MGRS. Um, one system is no more or less accurate than the other. They are just, two different ways of positioning a point. So many experienced users prefer UTM over the latitude longitude when using 7.5 degrees topographic quadrangle maps. Ocean mapping sailors and other marine users, they always use this latitude longitude because it becomes easier for them to see the navigation charts and to optimize, the kind of methods they use for their own sailing. So it becomes easier for them when it comes to constructing map, and hence they use the UTM coordinates. So that's how the earth is being divided. It's been divided into 60 zones. And when you look at the North Pole with this UTM projection, it is being depicted, the northern hemisphere will be depicted this way, and the zones of the southern hemisphere, when you look the earth's surface from the south pole, it is shown in this manner. So that's how the UTM coordinates are, or the UTM projection is there on the earth's surface, or the map of the earth surface. The Universal Polar Stereographic Projection, which is the UPS maps, or the maps that use the UPS projection, these are generally for areas north of 84 degrees and south of 80 degrees south, and they do not include the areas that are represented by the UTM coordinate system. The projection is equivalent to the polar aspect of the stereographic projection of the spheroid with specific parameters. The central point is either the North Pole or the South Pole. The UTM system leaves round holes at the top and the bottom of the world. These will be filled in by two zones of the Universal Polar Stereographic Coordinate System. The UPS North covers the area from 84 degrees north to the North Pole. The UPS South will cover area which is from 80 degrees south to the South Pole. The UPS system is based on the stereographic projection customized for each pole. The system achieves the same accuracy as that of the UTM system. So that's how the North Pole and the South Pole is being depicted using the UPS system, projected coordinate system. So that was all about maps. Now, from what we have discussed till now, you need to know that maps are drawn to scale. You need to know what are the major elements that are depicted on the map, and you need to know the scales that are being used in the map. You need to know the conventional signs and symbols that have to be shown on the map when it comes to constructing map. You need to know that okay, I cannot draw completely broad road, so how do I depict that there's a metalled road or there's a cart track, or maybe in terms of a footpath, how do I show it? You need to know the conventional signs and symbols. Apart from that, you also need to know what kind of projection you will use to determine the or to construct the map in that case. So if I am whether I am showing the polar areas, or whether I'm showing the mid latitude areas, or whether I'm showing the equatorial areas, so depending upon the area, my projection will change, and I need to be thorough with that. So when you all are thorough, or when I'm thorough with all these concepts, I come to the major part of cartography, which we call it as the major changes that have been brought in cartography, which is a technology. So all this was art and science, calculations and drawing and everything was art and science. But now when it comes to technology, the all the softwares in the present times that are being used for constructing maps for various purposes brings us to geographic information system, which is nothing but GIS. Now, we all know what is GIS, we all know what are components of GIS. So, all that basic knowledge of GIS, we all are quite thorough with. You know, um, we all know that geography is a terminology which is difficult to define. Similar is the term geographic information system. It is difficult to define, but then too, there have been people who've tried defining, who's tried explaining. So it's easier when it comes to explaining geographic information system rather than defining, because there's so much into geographic information system that it becomes difficult for us to put it into one definition. So explaining what is geographic information system, it is nothing but a system or a tool for displaying and analyzing data related to the positions on the earth's surface. It's a multi-component environment used to create, manage, visualize and analyze data and its spatial counterpart. um, as I told you, there have been various people. There are people who've tried defining GIS, and the most accepted definition till now for GIS, which has been provided by the National Center of Geographic Information and Analysis, defines GIS as a system of hardware, software, and procedures to facilitate the management, manipulation, analysis, modeling, representation, and display of geographic data to solve complex problems regarding planning and management of resources. These resources may be man made resources or natural resources, both will be included. Geographic information systems, its importance have increased over the period of time, and it has become a major tool when it comes to urban and resource planning and management. Urban planning and management, resource planning and management, GIS is becoming an essential tool. It is now being used for land use planning, utilities management, ecosystem modeling, landscape assessment and planning, transportation and infrastructure planning, market analysis, visual impact analysis, facilities management, tax assessment, estate analysis, and many other applications. Why? Because it has major functions, and these functions include data entry, data display, data management, information retrieval, and analysis. So, the components of GIS that we have, these are basic 5 components that we require when it comes to GIS. It is the hardware, the software, the data, people, and methods. You need a hardware. Hardware is nothing but your computer, your desktop. You need that so that you can install the software, you can work on it, correct? So that hardware is required. Software, yeah, of course, you need the tool, you need the function. And how is that given to us? It is given in terms of a software. What do we call ArcGIS to be? ArcGIS is nothing but software. So if I just have my computer, it's not enough for me to construct a map. I need ArcGIS to be installed, or QGIS to be installed on my computer, so that all that data that I want to put in, or all the map that I want to construct can be constructed, correct? The software components that are there should be, the tools for the input and manipulation of the geographic information. The database management system, which will have my data, through which I will be constructing the map, through which I will determine the theme of my map. The tools that support, the query analysis or the visualization, and also a graphical user interface which will, have an easy access to all the tools that are provided in the software. After that, we have data. Now, nothing can be done without a data. If I want to construct say a population density map, and if I don't have If I do not have the population data, how will I construct it? So I need to have that data. All that data will be stored in what we call it as the database, that will be integrated with the software which will help me construct a map. So data again becomes a very important component. Without data I cannot do anything. Just having the software and the data will not help me. I need to have the hardware for it. Apart from that, people, which is the next component of GIS, of course people is required. Who will manage the hardware, who will install the software, who will use the software? It is nothing but people. We will be using it, so we also become a very important component of GIS. If I have the software, if I have the hardware, if I have the data, I cannot construct till I don't put in the effort of constructing the map or using the hardware, using the software. So the technical specialist who specializing in that say area have to be there. Say if I just give my laptop, I give my laptop to say a small child in that case, or maybe an engineer in that case. Let's take it up. Someone who's done civil engineering, I go and give my map and I say, okay, you use QGIS and you construct a map. He or she will not be able to do that because he or she does not specialize in this area. Their specialization is different. So definitely specialized people, just having people will not help. Specialized people in this software has to be there when it comes to constructing a map. Civil engineers will not know that they need to have a title, they need to have the north arrow, they need to have the legend in a map. They'll just draw something and give it. They don't know whether we have to draw it to scale or not. What kind of scale do we use? Because their systems will be different, our systems will be different. So that kind of specialized people we do require when it comes to using these hardware, softwares, and data for GIS. Apart from that, the last component that we have is the method. Now, a successful GIS will operate according to a well designed plan and business rule, which are nothing but the models and operating practices unique to each organization. Now, um, let's say I have a proper plan of reaching my destination. Okay, so that plan will include certain methods. One will have method A, the other will have method B. So all those methods, let me tell you in terms of the GIS phrases, or maybe the GIS technical words. Say I want to have a site suitability analysis for solar panels. So when it comes to site suitability analysis of solar panels, I need to see which areas are um, barren. Barren as in they're not being used for forests, they're not there are no natural features or natural vegetative area that I am actually cutting off. I can't do that. Then I need to look at the rivers, the water bodies, whether they are there in that area or not. If they are there, I have to select another area. Then I have to look into the slope. I need to look into the temperature of that area. So all this, method one is the slope. Method 2 will be the aspect. Method 3 will be water bodies. Method 4 will be vegetative areas. All this then will have an overlay analysis where I'll be having, say, my site. I'll be deciding the site. So that kind of, I should say, designing is done with the help of methods. Few things coming from here, few things coming from there, few things coming from the third side, all coming together, and then I am deciding on one point. Will be different methods coming together. So that method is also required when it comes to components. So if one or the other thing is missing, it is very difficult to actually use GIS, or in that case to be a GIS specialist. If I have the hardware, if I don't have the software, I can't do anything. If I have the data and I do not have the software, I can't do anything. If I have the hardware, software, and data methods in that case, and I don't have people, I can't do anything. So each and every component is very, very important. When it comes to the kind of data that are being depicted in a GIS, there are two types of data. Majorly, what people say is there are two types of data: spatial data and aspatial data. We call it as attribute data or non-spatial data. But there's also a third kind of data which is there, which is metadata. So we'll come to each and every type of data. The basic difference between the spatial and the non-spatial data is spatial data, they have a specific location. They have certain x and y coordinates. They're given in terms of absolute location. But when it comes to aspatial data or attribute data, they are with reference to these spatial data. There's some other kind of data. There's a table which you will give which will give you the extra data of the spatial data which is being represented is the attribute data. So let's look into what type of data is spatial data and what comes under spatial data. Spatial data is can be represented in the form of vector data, in the form of raster data, in the form of images, in the form of TINs, which is triangular irregular networks, or in terms of the terrain data sets. Vector data is nothing but point, line, and polygon. We all know what a point, line, and polygon. We all know how there are different shape files and how there are different layers that can be constructed when it comes to point data, line data, and polygon data. What kind of data can be represented as point? Buildings, cities in a map can be shown by point data. Line data is majorly, shown with the help of a line. That's how we say it, an arc in GIS terminology. And polylines like roads, rivers, they are all polyline data or line data. Polygon data, these are area datas. So vegetative area or forested area or cultivated area, all these can be shown through polygons. Raster data or grid data, these are matrices or numbers describing maybe the elevation, maybe the population, maybe the herbicide use, etc. Then you have the images or the pictures, such as the remote sensing data or the scans of maps. Now, this is a special grid type of data. This is a special grid where each grid or each pixel in that case has a number, and what color it has a specific color. Each and every pixel has a specific color, has a specific number, which will be used further for analysis. And whatever my purpose of the map is, then if I want to look into the vegetative areas, the vegetative areas will be depicted by certain color scheme. Each and every grid on that color scheme will have a unique number, which we call it as the DN number, which will come in further um, discussions, further sessions, where we will see what DN numbers are and how do they help us in identifying the features. Apart from that, the next form of spatial data that we have is triangular irregular networks, which is discretized continuous data. We also have terrain data sets, which are built from the LIDAR and other point cloud data. Bringing us to the next type of data that is there in GIS, which is attribute data. Now, attribute data or aspatial data or non-spatial data. You know, this is nothing but the data of the spatial data, in simple words. Now, say if I have depicted a road, okay. Now that uh, road I have digitized on a software, and I have given that name as a GT road. Okay, so that name becomes the attribute data. With that, if I have also said that okay, the length of the data is say 10 kilometers, and the width of the road is say 2 kilometers, and the starting point and the ending point is given. And then the number of say toll nakas that I have on the road, that is also given. So all that is there in the form of a table. See, this kind of a table, that table we call it as attribute data. So when I want to, that my line is that spatial data, but that information of the line, be it in terms of the name, be it in terms of the toll nakas, be it in terms of length, breadth, the starting point, the ending point, all that will be my attribute data. Now, this is nothing but, as I had mentioned earlier also, it is the brains of the map. So when I want to do analysis, say I want to construct a buffer for the line. So what will I do? I will select the line and then I will have to do the buffering, say some 2 kilometers away from the ending point or something like that. That kind of a buffering, if I want to do that analysis, will be based on my attribute data. A point, a vector, or a raster geologic map might describe a rock unit on a map with a single number, letter, or a name. But the associated attribute table might have age, lithology, person codes, or the rock type, etc. All that data that we have of a geologic map, which does not include my location, is termed as attribute data. Most GIS programs can either plot the polygon by the identifier or by one or the other attribute. The next type of data which is there, which is metadata, which is generally the most forgotten data type for GIS. This is absolutely necessary, because if you're going to use the data, or if someone is going to use my data, it is required. Why? Because it contains information like the scale, the accuracy, the projection, the data source, the manipulations, how the data was acquired. All that is there in metadata, which is required when someone is using my data, or if I am going to use someone else's data. When I am using a shapefile of someone who has constructed that for me, I need to know what kind of projection they have used. I need to know what is the accuracy. I need to know what is the scale. Then only that will help me in further analysis. And all that is stored in the metadata, and hence that becomes very, very necessary. Many different standards for collection and representation of metadata is being used, such as the FGDC used by the US government agencies. Um, the basic idea of metadata is nothing but giving information of that spatial data that is there on the map. That's it. Bringing us to something known as the scales of measurement. The scales of measurement, or the level of measurement, is nothing but a system for classifying attribute data into four categories, which we call it as nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, which is often abbreviated like as NOIR. N for nominal, O for ordinal, I for interval, and R for ratio. Each category is distinguished by the range of possible values and the types of comparisons that can be made between values. In GIS and spatial analysis, the scale of a variable determines the types of analytical methods that may properly be employed. In cartography, different types of symbology and different types of thematic maps are used for each and every type of scale of measurement. The first type of scale that comes in is the nominal scale. The nominal scale is associated with this measurement system, and they are being used to identify one instance from the other. They may also establish a kind of group or a class or a number or a category with which the object can be associated. A group of people together, B group of people together, C group of people together, that kind of grouping can be done in nominal scale. These values are qualities and not quantities. They have no relation to a fixed point or a linear scale. Coding schemes for land use, say vegetation is green, heighted areas is brown, communication lines is black, roads are red, water bodies are blue. All these coding systems of the land uses, this is a example of nominal scale. Soil types, red soil, black soil, laterite soil, all these types of soil, nominal scale. These are nothing related to the quantity. They have no relation to a fixed point. So nominal. Ordinal, the name itself tells you, it determines the order. How much better or how worse, prettier, healthier, all this, something that cannot be demonstrated from ordinal numbers. So when it, for example, like running, a race, who comes first, who comes second, who comes third, is ordinal scale. So knowing the winners only by place, you do not know how much faster the first runner when it comes to the second runner. I don't know how much faster was he or she. I just know he came first and the other one was the second and the third. So first, second and third, I just know their place in that scale. It does not establish any kind of magnitude or relative proportions. One was faster, okay, how much faster, I don't know. So that relationship cannot be determined in an ordinal scale. It only determines the position. Bringing us to the next one, which is interval scale. Intervals data is a quantitative or a numerical data that is measured on a physical scale without a true origin. That is, the value of 0 does not represent the absence of a property. The best example here is temperature. Temperature measured in degrees Fahrenheit, because 0 degrees does not mean that there is absence of temperature. There's always temperature. 0 degrees also represents some kind of temperature. 10 degrees will also represent, and in that case 100 degrees will also represent some kind of temperature. So 0 does not mean that there is nothing, there is absence of that property. When it comes to interval scale, there is no true 0 point. Relative comparisons can be made between measurements, but ratio and proportion determinations are not possible. pH scale is also a kind of or also an example of interval scale, where 0 does not show that there's an absence. 0 shows it is acidic, 14 shows it is basic. So yes, pH scale also becomes an example of interval scale. Bringing us to the next and the last type of scale of measurement, which is ratio scale. Now, ratio scale is similar as to the interval scale, with one added feature, which says that 0 is very, very important. See, distance in that case. 0 distance says there's an absence. It has a definite measurement. It has a meaningful 0. 0 distance, 14 kilometer distance. 0 distance means no distance. 14 kilometers, yes, I have to travel. So ratio data is quantitative data in which ratios of two values have definite meaning. It has a meaningful 0. A common geographic example of ratio scale or ratio data in that case is density. Any percent value from 0 to 100 will have a meaningful 0. Zero population density, that means there's no population there. Correct? So that's how 0 has a meaning in this data or in this scale of measurement. The values from the ratio measurement system are derived relative to a fixed 0 point on a linear scale. Mathematical operations can be used on these values with predictable and meaningful results. So, apart from distance, other examples that we have for ratio scale will be age, weight, volume, etc. This type of measurement system used may have a dramatic effect on the interpretation of resulting values. The significance of this discussion on the numbers is that all numbers cannot be treated the same. It is important to know what type of measurement system has to be used in a raster data set so that appropriate operations and functions can be implemented and the results can be predicted. Whether the results being predictive are accurate or not can also be determined or determined, in fact, by the type of measurement system that you use. The spatial analysis tool that we have in GIS, uh, you will see that does not actually distinguish between the four different types of measurements when asked to process or manipulate the values. Most mathematical operations work well on the ratio values, but when interval, ordinal, or nominal values are multiplied, divided, or evaluated for the square root, the results are typically meaningless. Because the zero that we were saying that zero does not have a meaning for these scales, definitely the results will not be as meaningful as when it comes to mathematical operations when done with ratio values. On the other hand, subtraction and addition and Boolean determinations can be meaningful when used on interval and ordinal values. Attribute handling within and between the raster data sets is most important, effective, and efficient when using nominal measurements. Please be very thorough with these scales of measurements because the type of scale of measurement that you use will affect your results. So, whether you want to use ratio or whether you want to use interval, nominal, ordinal, depending upon the project that you have taken up, will help you know whether your results will be accurate or not, whether you will have a predictable result or not. This brings us to the next the discussion of our session today, which will be the geospatial data models. Now, geospatial data models is again in terms of two primary ones, two spatial data models, which is nothing but vector and raster. We all know vector data is represented in the form of points, lines, and polygons, whereas raster data model is actually represented with the help of a rectangular matrix of square cells, which we call it as pixels in the GIS terminology. The vector data formats which we first come to or which we first discuss is nothing but a subpart of the vector data model. All spatial data models are approaches for storing the spatial location of geographic features in a database. Vector data formats become the easiest form of storage. Vector storage implies the use of vectors or directional lines to represent the geographic features. um, they are in terms of point, lines, and polygons. The vector data comes in the form of points, lines that are geometrically and mathematically associated. This is a very important point that you need to remember. These are geometrically and mathematically associated. The formats, as we mentioned, let's discuss them in detail. First comes the points, which is, xy coordinates. So one pair of coordinate will define the point feature. It will have an individual x and y, which is shown in this table. You have point number one, you have the x coordinate, you have the y coordinate. It's just this much of information that the points will have in terms of spatial data. Polylines is the next form of data format, how the vector data is being represented. So you have two or more pairs of coordinates, and there are series of connected points which actually form a line. So you see, you have node 1, x and y, which was point data, but this node 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all together is actually giving us a line. When you connect these points, it shows as a polyline. So my polyline A has two nodes. See it over here. Polyline A has two nodes, which is 1 and 3. 1 will have its own coordinates x and y. 3 will have its own coordinate. Similarly, B line has again two nodes, which is 3 and 4. So 3 will have its own individual coordinate and 4 will have its own individual coordinate. So lines is nothing but two or more pair of coordinates that are connected defines the line feature. Points will have only one, polylines will have two or more. Polygons are nothing but multiple pair of coordinates that are connected and closed by a defined polygon feature. A series of connected points that loop back to the first point. The starting and the ending points are same. In short, there can be multiple polygons that can exist in one layer. Polygons can have internal polygons, or we call it as holes. The beginning and the ending coordinates of the polygons are always the same. You see in the picture that has been given here, my polygon A, if I start from point 1 to point 3 to point 4 to point 2 and then back to 1, when I come and I finish off at 1 itself, then only that will be a polygon, else it becomes a line. So my polygon A has nodes 1, 2, 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3 and 4. So 4 nodes, each of which has its own coordinates. So it has multiple pair of coordinates. Polygons will always have multiple pair of coordinates. There can be multiple polygons that can be in one layer, as well as one polygon may have another small polygon within it also. So this is how the vector data formats or the vector features on a GIS structure is represented. You have arcs, you have polygons, you have points. We call it as nodes, vertices for points. Lines are known as arcs. Polygons are the same, polygons. So that's how the vector systems are being shown or depicted on a GIS map structure. The vector data models that we have, there are several different types, but the most common form of the vector data models that we have are two. One is the topological data model. Topological data model is the most popular method of retaining spatial relationships among features, and it is a mathematical concept that has its principle based on the adjacency and connectivity. So the network analysis that we do on a GIS software is nothing but topological data model. It's a form of topological data model. The topologic data structure is often referred to as an intelligent data structure because spatial relationships between geographic features are easily derived when you're using them. The primarily for this reason that I'm saying that Geographic features can be easily the relationships between the geographic features can be derived. Topology data model becomes a dominant vector data structure which is currently being used in GIS technology. It's only because it derives the spatial relationship between geographic features, that it becomes very important. So this is how my relationship between the topologic relationships can be determined in the GIS environment. You see point Q, R, and S. You have its X and Y coordinates. You have your points over here, and you have the begin node, you have the end node, and then you have the left and the right polygon. So for my line 11, if I want to derive the relationship between a line and a polygon here, the right hand side polygon becomes A, the left hand side there is no polygon, so it's left empty. Similarly, when it comes to say this line, which is line 52 for me over here, if I look at line 52, the right hand side becomes the B polygon and the left hand side becomes the A polygon. So this is how my topology relationship has been derived. Similarly, for polygons, if you see here, I have two polygons A and B. Now, polygon A has lines like 11, 12, 52, 53, and 54, whereas polygon B has lines like 52, 53, 19, 15, 14, and 13. My common lines between A and B become 52 and 53. So that kind of relationship can definitely be derived, and we call that relationship to be topology relationship. Apart from that, the next form of, or the next data model, the vector data model, which is again being used, is the computer aided drafting, which we commonly call it as CAD. Okay, so the secondary vector data structure that is common among GIS softwares is the computer aided drafting, which is the CAD data structure. This structure consists of listing elements, not features, defined by strings of vertices to define geographic features. There's a considerable redundancy when this data model with this data model, since the boundary segment between two polygons can be stored twice, one for each feature. So if I'm say there are two buildings side by side, just they are stuck to each other. So what happens, the boundary, there's one common boundary, and that common boundary may be depicted twice in the CAD feature. That's why we call it as redundancy of the data model. And the polygons can be stored twice if there is um, the if there's one feature being repeated again, they are side by side. The CAD structure emerged from the development of computer graphics without specific consideration of processing geographic features. Accordingly, since features, for example, polygons, are self contained and independent, questions about adjacency of features can be difficult to answer. The CAD vector model lacks the definition of spatial relationships between features that is defined by the topologic data model. A very important point for CAD is it lacks the definition of the spatial relationship of features, which is there in the topologic data model. CAD has recently been collaborated with GIS softwares. Majorly it was the topologic data model that are being used. See, for example, this is the CAD, this is how CAD is being used. There can be 3D modeling done on CAD. So this is an internal 3D mapping of say an office or a building. In that case, where it is very easy to determine what is the height, determine the height of one wall, the height of the other one, what kind of feature, what kind of design will be there on the wall, what will be the total height of that building. So 3D analysis can be done when CAD and GIS together is collaborated. The advantages of vector data model is the vector data models, they tend to be better representations of reality due to accuracy and precision of the points, lines and polygons. This results in the vector data tending to be more aesthetically pleasing than the raster data, which we come next. We'll see how raster data is being represented. Vector data also provides an increased ability to alter the scale of observation and analysis. Um, as each coordinate pair is associated with a point or a line or a polygon, represents in infinite exact locations. Zooming deep into the layer or deep into the vector layer does not change the view, and this becomes easier, to visualize, to understand the area rather than the raster ones. The raster ones, the more you zoom in that case, more blur it becomes difficult to understand. Vector data also tends to be more compact in terms of the data structure, so file sizes are typically smaller than that of the raster ones. The last advantage of the vector data is topology. Topology can be performed, which is spatial analysis, can be performed on a vector layer. Error detection can be done, network analysis can be done, proximity analysis can be done. So all that can be done on the vector data, which is not possible in the raster data. Apart from the advantages, it also has certain disadvantages. It has two primary disadvantages. Um, One being the data structure tends to be more complex than the simple raster data model, as the location of each vertex must be stored explicitly in the model. There are no shortcuts for storing data like that there are for raster models. There are no shortcuts. Let's be in very simple, there are no shortcuts for storing the data. That has to be it is elaborate and you have to go through that process. The next disadvantage is the implementation of spatial analysis can also be relatively complicated due to minor differences in accuracy and precision between the input data sets. If the input data sets have minor differences with accuracy and precision, it becomes very difficult to have or to perform spatial analysis and then to get accurate or precise results. So these are two primary disadvantages of the vector data model. Apart from that, you also have another disadvantage, which says that the algorithms for manipulating and analyzing the vector data are complex and can lead to intensive processing requirements, particularly when it comes to dealing with large data sets. This brings us to the next data model that we have, which is the raster data model. And as I told you earlier, raster data models is nothing but the information is given or it is depicted with the help of pixels. These pixels are stored in rows and columns. Pixels are square shaped. They are arranged in rows and columns, which together form a rectangle. It may be a rectangle, it may be a square, depending upon the size of the image. So these pixels are used as building blocks for creating point lines, polygons or networks or surfaces in that case. Although pixels may be triangles, hexagons or even octagons, square pixels represent the simplest geometric form with which it is easy for us to work. Pixels can be in any form, but the most widely used form of pixel is nothing but a square. Typically, a single data value will be assigned to each and every grid local. Each cell in a raster carries a single value which represents the characteristic of the spatial phenomena at the location denoted by its row and column. So that's how a raster um, data model is shown in a GIS environment. You have the areas, and if you want to construct any line or a polygon, you actually will have to digitize it. You have no other option. You have to digitize the polygon, or you have to digitize the line, or you have to uh, digitize points in that case. So they're always shown in form of pixels, generally in the shape of a square pixel arranged in rectangular format. The data type for each cell value can either be an integer or a floating value. Alternatively, the raster graphic can reference a database management system wherein open-ended attribute tables can be used to associate multiple data values for each pixel. The raster model will average all values within a given pixel to yield a single value. For example, um, say my pixel has some part as vegetation, some part as settlement, some part as road, some part as water body. Now, all the reflective value of all these is different. So then, what to do? I need to have one value. So that one value is determined, is calculated. It's not even determined. It is calculated as an average value. So if there are four features, say 5, 10, 15, 20, so an average of these four will be stored in that pixel. The area covered by each pixel determines the spatial resolution of a raster model from which it is derived. Hence, the resolution is determined by measuring one side of the square pixel. Um, okay, you can see the pixels over here, correct? So if I want to determine the resolution of this pixel, what will I do is I will just measure one part of it. Since it is a square, I can measure only one, either say the length or the breadth. Once I can measure, and obviously all the other three sides will be the same. So when I want to know the resolution of the pixel, I will just measure one side of the pixel. Imagery employing the raster data form model must exhibit several properties. What are these properties? The first property is each pixel must hold at least one value. Even if that value is 0 is fine, but that value has to be there. As we said earlier, you see there are four features all having different reflective values. What will happen? The average of that value will be taken, but there has to be an value. The second is a cell can hold any alphanumeric index that represents an attribute. For example, if a raster image denotes elevation, the data values for each pixel would be some identification of elevation, usually in terms of the feet or maybe in terms of meters. So if I am showing, the height of, say, mm, a building, so I have to give the height as whether it is in feet or whether it is in meters. That has to be written. So it can also have an alphanumeric, so a number and a alphabet. The third property of the raster data model is that points and lines move to the center of the cells. So, as one might expect, if a 1 kilometer resolution raster image contains a river or a stream, the location of the actual waterway within the river pixel will be unclear. Um, yes, I would just finish it off in with this, that the points and lines move to the center of the cell. Not necessary that the waterway is in that. There can be a bit of distortion here and there with the raster data set, since it is square pixels. It is a pixel, it is not a proper line that can be depicted. So there will be a bit of distortion here and there. The methods for encoding the raster data sets, there are several methods for encoding, uh, but commonly used, there are three ways or three methods. The first method is cell by cell raster encoding. This is minimally intensive method that encodes a raster by creating records for each cell value by row and column. So see here, in the image that is given here, you see row 1 of the pixels. Row 1 has only one pixel yellow. So what will happen is this 1, 2, 3 and 4. So you have 4 zeros. So that is nothing there. Then you have one yellow over here. So it has 1. Then you have nothing again for the next 3. So it is 0, 0, 0. See the 8th one. It has nothing. No yellow pixels. So 0, 0, 0, 0 for all. So it stores value for each and every row and column, for each cell in the row and column. This is majorly, in terms of a large Excel sheet that you see. It is, since it is, such detailed values are being stored for each and every pixel in the row and column. It's detailing, so it is, and it's also very, I should say, very lengthy in that case. So it is referred to as exhaustive enumeration. The next form of the next method that we have is the run length raster coding. This method encodes cell values in runs of similarly valued pixels and can result in a highly compressed image file. The run length encoding method is useful in situations where large group of neighboring pixels have similar values, and is less useful where neighboring pixel values vary widely. So you see here, row 1 has 5. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5th. So this is the 5th pixel in row 1 that is actually required. Then you have, for the second row, you have the 5th and the 6th. So you have the 5th and the 6th. Only the pixel that has the value, the position of that pixel is written. You have nothing in the 8th row. So 8th row is not written. So this method is only used where large group of neighboring pixels have similar values. Otherwise, you cannot use this. The third one comes as the quadtree raster coding. The quadtree raster coding method divides a raster into a hierarchy of quadrants that are subdivided based on similar value pixels. Division of raster stops when the quadrant is made entirely from cells of the same value. A quadrant that cannot be subdivided is called a leaf node. This brings us to what are the advantages of these raster data models. Like vector data models, these also have certain advantages and disadvantages. The first advantage that we come across will be the technology required to create raster graphics is inexpensive and ubiquitous. Nearly everyone now, can download a raster image, or in that case, they also can have a digital camera through which they can click pictures. Pictures is nothing but a form of raster image. So yes, it is inexpensive. These graphics are often posted online. All these, if I don't have a digital camera, I will be downloading the data. All this downloaded data, someone or the other has posted it online, be it a private company, be it a public government for government users or government websites, they do have these images there, and I can easily download. So it's inexpensive, it is ubiquitous. At times, yeah, there are certain satellite imageries for which you have to pay. There are certain for which you don't have to pay. So for the, Landsat imageries, I don't have to pay for Landsat imageries. I can easily download it from the USGS website. So it is inexpensive for me. Just that I need a bit of Wi-Fi connection, or maybe a better connection, so that the image is downloaded properly. That's okay. That's not going to be very expensive. I am not spending lakhs for it. So yes, this raster data model is comparatively an inexpensive data model. Apart from that, raster graphics are relative simplicity of the underlying data structure. It's more or less not complicated, but not very simple also. So it has that kind of, if you understand it, it's simple for you. Let's take it that way. Each grid location represented in the raster image correlates with a single value. This simple data structure may also help to explain why it is relatively easy to perform overlay analysis on raster data. The simplicity, which is nothing but, each pixel having its own value, is also itself easy to interpret and maintain the graphics, which is, when you compare it to vector data, is not that easy. But you also have disadvantages. The first and the foremost disadvantage of raster data format is it is very, very large. It is so large, it, each and every image, raster image, satellite image in that case, is 1 GB almost. So it's that quite large files. So any raster file that covers a large area and has somewhat finely resolved pixels will quickly reach hundreds of megabytes in size, or it may go more with that. These large files are only getting larger as the quantity and quality of raster datasets continue to increase. Better raster datasets, larger the size, larger the space utilized in the hardware. The second disadvantage of the raster model is that the output images are less pretty than that of the vector ones. Vector ones, we said, the advantages is they are aesthetically, good enough. You like, or it's more, um, it's more clearer. But when it comes to raster images, or output images in that case, they are less pretty than that of the vector ones. This is particularly done, it's they are less pretty because these are either zoomed in, they are enlarged, and when they are enlarged, these pixels, they become blur. So when they become blur, it is, it's not easier to interpret what feature has been shown. Depending on how far one zooms into a raster image, the details and coherence of that image will quickly be lost amid a pixelite sea of seeming randomly colored grid cells. So you'll only find, red, red, red. If it's a vegetative area and it's a FCC image, you'll only find red, 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 red. But red, red, we know that, the computer can recognize light red and dark red and blood red, but for us it is difficult to recognize. So it becomes very blur, and it's less pretty, when you look at that kind of an image. The final disadvantage of the raster data model is that it is not suitable for some type of spatial analysis. For example, difficulties will arise when attempting for overlay analysis, and multiple raster graphics have to be produced at different scales and pixel resolutions. It is not that easy. Maybe the results will not be that accurate. Combining information from a raster image with a 10-meter spatial resolution, with a raster image of 1 meter spatial resolution, the output will not be proper, it won't be accurate, it won't be precise. some kind of network and spatial analysis, like if I want to determine the direction or have to do some kind of geocoding, that is a bit problematic when it comes to raster data storage. With the increase in technology and better GIS softwares that have come in, there can be raster vector conversions that can be done. Most of the data can be captured in a vector format, it can be digitized, and that data must be converted to a raster data structure, or it can be converted to a raster data structure, which we call it as vector raster conversions. Most GIS softwares allows the user to determine or define the raster grid cell size for vector raster conversion. So when I'm converting vector data to raster data, the GIS software will allow me to define the size of the pixel. It is imperative that the original scale, that is, for example, the accuracy of the data, has to be known before the conversion is done. The accuracy of data, often referred to as the resolution, should determine the cell size of the output raster map during the conversion. Most raster based GIS software requires the raster cell contain only a single discrete value. So we all know that the cell has only one discrete value. Accordingly, a data layer, maybe for a forest map, has to be broken down into a series of raster maps, each representing an attribute type. There has to be a species map, then there has to be a height map, then has to be a density map. All this has to be, these layers have to be constructed if I want a forested map in that case. Because the forested map will definitely, no, the forest will depend on the height, will, or what are the species there in the forest map, what is the density of the forest. Maybe in the center it is more dense, in the outskirts it's less dense. All that kind of maps, layers of maps, have to be constructed, or has to be derived from a raster map. So these are often referred to as one attribute maps. This is in contrast to most conventional vector data models that maintain data as multiple attribute maps. If I, for example, if I'm constructing a forested area, I'm digitizing a forested area, you know, I can digitize, and the attribute table I can write down. Okay, so one circle for the whole forested area, and within the polygon, I can have different polygon for different species. Correct? So that values then can be stored in the attribute data. But for raster, what do I have to do? I will have to have layers, different layers being extracted. The species map I have to extract, the height map I have to extract, the density map I have to extract. So all that extraction has to be done from the raster image. This basic distinction of the raster data storage provides the foundation for quantitative analysis techniques. It is often referred to as raster or map algebra. The use of raster data structures allow for sophisticated mathematical modeling processes, while vector-based systems, they are often constrained by the capabilities and language of a relational database management system. So, with this, I end the session for today with the introduction to maps and GIS. I hope things were clear. I open this session for your queries, for your questions. We shall clear your questions, and then we'll move on with clarifying whatever you want for clarifications.